Okay, welcome to the Digital Storytelling for Social Impact class number 2 on marketing and measurement. I am Rob Wu with the CEO of Cosvox. You're also on with Jeremy Bivens, the Managing Director of Good Dog Strategies. Welcome to class number 2. We will be getting started shortly, right after the hour. So make sure that you get settled in, grab a cup of coffee, sip of water, cup of tea, whatever floats your boat, and we will be getting started shortly. If you do have any technical issues, feel free to chat it in right now. Happy to help you with audio issues or screen sharing issues. And we'll be happy to play some tech support right before a class starts. We'll be back on in just a minute. Welcome to the Digital Storytelling for Social Impact class number 2. We will be getting started shortly. My name is Rob Wood, CEO of Cosvox. You're also on with Jeremy Bivens, the Managing Director of Good Dog Strategies. Jeremy is our instructor for today, and we will be getting started shortly. In the meantime, some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, so you'll get an email copy of the recording of this class within the next day. Class number 1, if you did attend, has been sent to you as of Monday morning. So if you did not receive the link to the video recording or the slides to class number 1, please make sure to check your spam inbox. A lot of times our emails get sent over there. After you do check your spam inbox, if it's not there, feel free to email us support@cosvox.com, and I will chat in that email address as well so that you can email us for a copy of the slides as well as a copy of the recording. We will be back in just 1 minute as we wait for the last few participants of our class number 2 to join. Hey, Jeremy, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing well, enjoying this quarantine business going on. I'm sure all of us are working at home right now.
Yeah, my office is normally at home, so I haven't noticed too much of a difference in my personal day to day, but certainly with working with clients.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, I want to see what is your number 1 tip on working at home?
Is that my number one tip?
Yeah, your number 1 tip.
I mean, I work best with deadlines and with processes. So the thing that actually keeps me going is having a project management tool where I can just kind of dump everything. And then I kind of sit in a space in my apartment that's not used for anything else. So I have my desk set up in a corner of the apartment that's just for working time. And I sit there and rearrange my day based on my Asana board to make sure that I get through all of my tasks based on the day and the times and things like that that they're due.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip, kind of just separating work from life, because when you work at home a lot, you tend to work a lot more. So
That's
I
right.
think it's a great tip. All right, well, we are at the top of the hour. So welcome to the Digital Storytelling for Social Impact class number 2 on marketing and measurement. My name is Rob Wu, the CEO of Cosvox. You're also on with Jeremy Bivens, the Managing Director of Good Dog Strategies.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad that everybody could join us today.
And we're excited to share with you on our second class of storytelling, just continuing on discussion. On the first class, we talked about, what is a story? Why does it matter? Talked about the story map, some strategies, some content, and some tools. And marketing measurement is really extending out how you can execute on digital storytelling. A few housekeeping items before we start too far is that you should have received an email for class number 1 with the slides as well as the recordings on Monday, which is yesterday. If you did not receive the slides or recordings, feel free to email us support@cosvox.com. I just put that into the chat window so you can find that, click on that, and just ping us, and we're more than happy to send you a copy of the slides or video. Class number 2 today is being recorded as well as the slides will be shared by the end of today or early tomorrow. So you have full access to that. So look out for an email from Cosvox on the links to that. Well, Jeremy is a friend, but also the managing director of Good Dog Strategies. I just want to introduce him real quickly. I've been working with Jeremy for the past 11 or 12 years. First met him at the Rockefeller Foundation when he was a digital strategist over there, helping out lots of grantees with not only with the programming, but also with the storytelling. Fast forward, we worked with Cosvox, we worked with the Rockefeller Foundation on a Hatch for Good digital storytelling initiative. And we also worked with them on the Giving Tuesday initiative. A big part of that is around storytelling and leveraging that for fundraising. So super excited just for you all to learn from Jeremy some of the latest best practices, but also some of the proven things that work when it comes to digital storytelling. So without further ado, just want to introduce to you all again, Jeremy Bivens, the Managing Director of Good Dog Strategies.
All right, thanks, Rob. Thanks everybody for joining as we pile through the first slides. Do you want to talk a little bit about Cosvox, or are we good to dive in?
I think we're good to dive in just because we're a little bit short on time.
All right, that sounds good. So if you've joined us last time, in the first conversation that we had, we talked about what is a story, all the components that kind of go into making one, the strategies and things around the process of storytelling, as it were. And so just a quick reminder as we get started. So what is a story? It's just an account of imaginary or real people, events told for entertainment, which in our sector, those stories are used to educate and motivate people to take an action. Pretty quick and simple. We also talked a bit about the 5 pillars of digital storytelling, where we've really focused on strategy and capacity. Today, we're going to dive a bit deeper into content, platforms, and evaluation. First, starting with audience definition. How do you know you're reaching the right people? We're going to review some tools that'll help us do that. And then later on, we're going to talk a little bit more about the platforms that help you reach them. And this can be a really big section because of the nature of all the different platforms and the ways you evaluate that are out there. So I'm going to try to do my best to get through it in the roughly hour-ish that we have. But feel free to bring some of your questions or all of your questions on the one-on-one time that we have later on once we get those scheduled. Because this is probably the biggest bite around storytelling, is thinking about how you produce all that content, where do you put it all, and then how do you know what's working? So before we dig in, let's start where we should always start, by revisiting our strategy. Your strategy is the overarching guide to your tactical decisions. So as we develop our content, we want to remember to always keep our audience top of mind. Who are you trying to reach? How do they like to be spoken to? And remember that it's okay to have multiple audiences, but you still want to be as specific as you can, even between audience segments. Define your overall messaging. When someone reads your content, what overarching themes will they take away about what your organization does? How is it going about the thing that it's doing? Who are you? That's the type of questions you really want to answer when you define your overall messaging. When somebody reads that, how are they going to think about your organization? What are they going to know that's different about you? When someone reads, watches, or listens to your content, what do you want them to think? How do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do? Again, this is a great filter when you start grading the stories that you put together. It's probably the easiest way to think about translating this design to some of your colleagues. When you're writing something, think about how do you want them to think, what do you want them to think, how do you want them to feel, and at the end of it, what do you want them to do? And finally, what does success look like? How do you know you've achieved it? Let's think about some real SMART goals, some measurable goals that you can achieve, and how those tie into the tactical decisions we're going to talk about. This next thing here is you've probably seen something like this. This is the engagement funnel. It's a basic take on what you probably heard about as the marketing funnel that visualizes how people learn about your organization, how they get to know your programs and services, and ultimately how you transition them into volunteers or donors for your organization. Again, there's a bunch of different ways you've probably seen this before, but this one's my favorite because it's the simplest and easiest to follow. And it also is really specific to nonprofits and social impact organizations. And I dropped that logo at the bottom of the funnel, not because the whale is eating people at the bottom of the pyramid, but because Whole Whale actually put this together, and they're a phenomenal organization. They really specialize in analytics and thinking about how you measure impact digitally. So if you're not familiar with Whole Whale, you should definitely go check them out. It's wholewhale.com. And so starting from the top, as people enter your funnel, they are aware of your organization. They know you exist. It's the starting phase. It's the first introduction to a would-be supporter. So maybe they saw you on Facebook, maybe they saw one of your tweets, or maybe they came in through a blog post. It just kind of got shared around. They're just aware that you exist. The next phase as you go down is interested. You have permission to communicate with this person. It's the next step in your relationship, the step beyond the social media engagement. They liked what they read, and now they wanted to sign up to learn more, probably by going to your email sign-up page, or visiting your website, or actually clicking the follow and subscribe button across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, etc. Next, as we start to shrink that funnel, they're engaged. People who are ready to take action to support your cause. After they've gotten to know you, these people are ready for you to ask them to do something on your behalf. They share your content, they read your emails, they react and engage with your posts. Maybe they even tell their friends about you. And then the final step at the bottom there is the committed group. These are people that donate to your organization. After they've engaged with your posts, your blog posts and your emails, they subscribe to your blog, they're ready to commit. They are all in with you. They donate to your organization, they volunteer at your events. These are your most hardened champions. You'll also notice, as I kind of referenced down this pyramid, is that the wide end at the top is really broad. And that's because you're going to start out with a much broader base of people, a much bigger audience when you start. The people that are aware of your organization, they could be much, much larger than as it narrows down to the most engaged and committed audience members. And during the life cycle of someone going through this funnel, they may move from point to point over time. I mean, they definitely will as long as you continue to engage them. But what I mean by that is they may actually jump one or two ahead or behind. So they may be engaged at one point and move back into interested. Or you could find someone who you've considered interested that jumps right back to committed. That's totally normal. But by imagining where your audience is taking this journey with your organization, it helps you assess what your messaging should be, specifically who you should be serving it to and the types of things that they're going to want to read about. As we go through some of the future slides, it's good to keep these slices in mind and how they might slot into any of the approaches or examples. And I'll just say one last example before we move on. What I mean by that is you wouldn't necessarily ask somebody who's aware of your organization to donate, because that's a bigger commitment than saying somebody who's aware, read this blog post, right? Or if somebody who's committed, you can ask them to read the blog post, but you probably also want to spice up the messaging a little bit on the donation asks as well. So next, let's dig in deeper on your audience. It's time to ask some questions. Who is your audience? Where do they spend time online? What are they doing or reading? Being able to answer these questions should inform things like the types of content that you produce, where you're going to promote it, and how you'll know if your promotions are actually working. So how do you tell who your audience is? The first place I would go is defining your audience. When you boil it down based on your work, who is it that you're serving? Who are your funders and your volunteers? These are all segments of your audience. Another could be who you want your audience to be. So it's great to have a segment of your audience that's a donor or a volunteer, but who else are you trying to reach? Who are some of the ideal folks that you want to hit? So for example, one organization that I worked with a few months ago was doing very well among boomers. And they recognized that as well as they were doing with that audience, over time, they were going to need to start to engage a younger demographic. And so they said, we're not really interested in Gen Z, but we really want to go after the millennials. You know, how do we define a content strategy that really engages millennials? Or another organization I work with now focuses on helping 20-somethings with common life issues like managing, changing family relationships, navigating personal finance, starting their careers. So they're very specific about the people they're serving. They're really aiming for people in their 20s. And while they already attract people who are in their 30s and 40s and 50s and above, they try to keep laser focused on that 20-something demographic to make sure that their content strategy is really delivering to the people they care most about. So if you're not sure who you're currently serving, specifically online, there's some great tools to help you find that out. Best of all, Most of what I'll show you here today, if not all of it, is actually free, and you probably already use it in some way, shape, or form. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. The first place I always go is Google Analytics. If you have a website, you probably already have this set up on your site or some sort of paid equivalent like WebTrends. Google Analytics is free, it's easy to use, it's pervasive, and it links to a bunch of the other stuff you care about. So I always recommend starting there. If you're looking at your Google Analytics dashboard and you open the audience menu on the left side of the screen, you see a host of options for assessing who's accessing your site, ranging from audience demographics, the types of devices or browsers they're using, even some interest segments that are gleaned from the audience's other page visits and searches, such as, are they interested in news and news events, concerts, lifestyle things of that nature. All this information is aggregated, so you can't see individual details. So that alleviates some of the privacy concerns, some. But it gives you a pretty good sense of the types of things your audience are really interested in. Anyway, one of the first things to look at under the demographics tab, in this view, you can see the gender identity, which will obviously need an update, and the age groups that you're serving. Age can be one of the most useful information points because it can help inform things like the language, the vernacular you want to use in your copy, or the types of platforms you want to take advantage of in your marketing. For example, if you have a large cohort of 18 to 24, and that's your core audience, this is a segment that you really want to reach, you might research some media outlets that cater to that group so you can understand the types of content that they're consuming, the common challenges or concerns that they face, and other relevant facts that could benefit your marketing. These media groups have already done some of the research on your behalf. So if you just spend some time, hanging out on their pages and reviewing the types of things that people are interacting with, you can start to get a sense of how you might define some of your content in that category as well. Another very important view in Google Analytics is the acquisition tab. Under this tab, you'll be able to see how many people are being directed to your site from other places. Specifically, under the source and medium view, as you can see here on the screen, that view, when it's open, you can see the website's top referring sites are displayed in that list. So we can see on this Direct None, Google Organic, Facebook Social, blah, blah, blah. As you go down, and if I had more real estate on this page, you could see a whole list of other data points that we'll talk a little bit about, so you can assess where your traffic is coming from. The number one up there, that Direct None, it's also good to point out, doesn't mean that everybody came to your site by jotting down your website address and just went straight there. That's Google's way of saying some of it is that, and some of it we're not really sure. A lot of browsers now try to block cookies and pixels the way that the services like Google and WebTrends track people across domains. And so when that happens, when you're blocked and Google's not sure where you came from, you get lumped into that Direct None category. So you might see that trickle up a little bit as more people use browsers focused on privacy. Google Organic, people are searching for your site, or they're searching for a question that has shown up on your site and they end up coming through. And then obviously Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, T.co, those are all social referrals, and you'll see them lumping together. And that will help you get a sense of where your audience is actually hanging out and spending time. So if you don't spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, but you notice that a healthy number of people are finding your content there and returning to your site from there, it might make sense to look at LinkedIn and spend more time creating content for that platform, similar to any other social network, or email, if email ends up being one of your top referrers. So when we talk about stories and content, what do we actually mean? And both of those terms are kind of used interchangeably. As we covered in the last class, your stories or your content can be a range of things. They can be photos and videos to long-form narratives or reports. Your stories don't have to be bestsellers. They basically just need a start, a middle, and an end. They need to frame a problem, a solution, and some conclusion or call to action. So while you're creating stories, no matter the length, you'll also likely begin generating supporting content, kind of B-roll, or things like quotes and statistics that can stand out on their own for things like Instagram posts or tweets. So as we jump in, let's remember our narrative framework. This is a great slide to tape to the wall of your desk because it can be a helpful resource to reference whenever you're writing something or you're editing somebody else's work, or maybe hand it off to the person who's doing the writing in the first place so they kind of have a rubric to make sure that they're hitting all the high notes while they're doing the writing. Your stories should inform your audience about the problem and the need. They should express why they should care about the cause or the item that's being presented to them. It should help them understand the solution. It should give a sense of urgency and an opportunity for them to act. But remember, we want to think about all of our content differently, not just the long form articles, the blog posts, and stories. We want to think about what else those stories create that can stand on their own or help us promote longer pieces. So let's take this video from We Robotics, a nonprofit I mentioned in our last class, a really small organization that works with local experts and communities throughout the world to use robotics and technology to solve pressing challenges. So one of the most popular projects that they help communities undertake is drone delivery of essential health services, like transporting medicines or samples back and forth from health facilities in places that lack traversable roads. In one mission, for example, a drone was able to deliver a life-saving drug in under 45 minutes, in contrast with an 8 to 12-hour drive that it would require depending on weather and road conditions at a time. So on one mission, the team pulled together their usual report. Someone wrote a blog post based on that report, and then they captured a bunch of photos and videos from the time that they were spending on the ground. Again, as I mentioned before, you might hear somebody call this B-roll by friends in the television or video production space. It's content that provides context, but it's not the main focus of the film. So let's take a look. Okay, so that's obviously time-lapsed footage. It wouldn't have taken a minute to cross that amount of that amount of terrain. And as you can see from the video, it's simple. It's the drone taking off. It's covering a significant amount of ground, which you can tell from the shots to be very difficult by car since there were few roads through those mountains, and then dropping off its payload. The whole shot is a little over a minute long, and it's been used in conjunction with several blog posts about cargo drone projects because it provides a more visceral experience than just reading about the cargo pickups and drop-offs. You get a real sense of the field that they're operating in and the experience without a bunch of other context. I mean, if I played this video for you without some of the copy around it, you wouldn't have a lot to go on what's happening, but you get a general idea that something is being moved from one place to another through the air. And so when you do have a bunch of context, a blog post, or maybe even just a couple of paragraphs or a paragraph on Facebook or Instagram, it really brings that piece to life. And this was B-roll. While it was not the main story that the organization wanted to tell, it's content that came out of that production process. So it would have ended up on kind of the cutting room floor and discarded. But because they kept it and uploaded it and used it as context, since it was published last September, it's received nearly 1,200 views, which isn't bad for B-roll. I work with organizations that produce main features that don't achieve that sort of statistic in just a few months. So it's always good to keep those other types of content items that you'd normally throw away in mind. Another example is from a small organization called Amendo from Instagram. Amendo focuses on generating positive content for people in their 20s. As I mentioned some of their work before. You can see that this Instagram post is very simple. It's very descriptive, has a very descriptive title. It uses vector images to convey the message. And you can consume this post on its own and process a few of the takeaways. Or the organization also includes a link in their bio to a full blog post with the same title that describes each tip in more detail. All they did was translate a narrative piece of storytelling into a digestible piece of content that served two purposes. First, it helped promote the article on their site. Some people will see this on Instagram, and then they'll head over to the website for more information on each of those pieces. Second, it's content that's good enough to stand on its own. If you work from home, which many of us are doing right now, you relate to the framing of the situation. As you read through each graphic, you don't necessarily need more context to understand the suggestion. Like get dressed, for example, is pretty clear, as is work normal hours. So the team condensed the article into a single image that gave them something different to share on Instagram than what's currently on their blog, and it didn't require much extra work on their part at all. So it's kind of a freebie in that way. They get to promote the article on their site, and they also get standalone content for their Instagram feed. So thinking about that content differently. and how else it can be used. Lastly in this, storytelling is also tremendously useful for transparency. You can use it to show your donors exactly where their support is going and for what purpose. So as you can see in this example from the Humans of New York campaign that we discussed last week, this is just a simple photo and a short caption that really conveys the heart of what their campaign was trying to do. It just captures everything that's going on the ground and adds a little hope and context to the storytelling. So where do you find things to share? So content comes from a variety of places. It's things that you and your organization are working on, and these don't have to be completed works either. They could be updates about big projects or initiatives that you're preparing. That last slide that we just went through with the Facebook post from Humans of New York is a great example of a simple update from the field. It could be articles that you've read that you want to share or respond to. This is more of a social media opportunity. If you're reading something interesting, share it on your social media. Add a comment to the share as well if you can provide one. Or you could write a longer response blog post for your website and then share that out. Think of it as a prompt. You could use photos or videos that you've taken. As we've discussed in the previous slides, you can use photos and videos for either primary content, where that item tells the story and that's the focus, like we saw with Humans of New York, sharing all of those photos from stuff that's happening on the ground, or as supplemental content, like We Robotics has done with their cargo drone video, which can be reused again and again and again against other types of posts and content. Think about the conferences and events that you've attended, virtual or physical. If you're going to a conference or an event, it's a great opportunity to create something. A former colleague of mine at the Rockefeller Foundation would always use conferences and events as her opportunity to create a blog post. She loved blogging, could not come up with a lot of ideas on her own based on what she was working on, but this was pretty routine for her. She loved being able to go somewhere, and then she would just jot down a list of 3 to 5 conference takeaways and then write a short post about each of those. The format's really something I think I shared in the blog post template that I created for this group, and we'll reshare that link with you guys at the end of the presentation. So your content doesn't always have to be about you either. If you find something relevant from someone else to share, invite them to guest post on your blog, or share that article on social media, or respond to them on social media with some content or context. And if you're working with a partner on a campaign, ask them to share their content with you in advance. This might help you think of other ways you can generate your own. And if it doesn't, at least it gives you something relevant to share and builds goodwill among your partners. Because at some point, you might run a campaign and you want them to help share it. So having that goodwill and that reciprocity is great. So the final reminder here, when you're in content creation mode, think more about the marketing than you do about perfecting the content. 40% of your time creating, 60% of your time distributing. So think of that on all the heels. Like I said, content comes from everywhere. One of the things we used to say when I was working in-house was, every time you get a piece of content, how do I use this 3 ways? You know, get a blog post, great. How does this become a pull paragraph that goes into a speech? How does this become a tweet and a Facebook or an Instagram post? How does this become something else? And then add it to the story bank. How do you keep reusing and thinking about your content in different ways? So now that we have some content ideas in mind, we're thinking about our audiences, what they like to consume. Let's think about where we put that content in front of them. So what are all the different platforms at your disposal? You have your website and your blog, your home base, your social media, your email, hopefully, brochures and collateral if you do a lot of in-person things, you deal with direct mail. For the purpose of this conversation, though, we're primarily going to focus on digital outlets. So let's start by thinking about social media, because that's the biggest one, and which platform is right for you. Not just to have a presence, but which one you should be thinking about spending your time on. So Facebook. Facebook's demise has been vastly overstated with an active monthly user base of nearly 2.5 billion people, 2.5 billion with a B. More people use Facebook each month than live in any one country on Earth. And except for people over 65, the majority of Americans use Facebook. Even Gen Z, though you'll find teens favor YouTube, Instagram, and Snapchat over Facebook generally. Facebook also tends to serve more women than it does men, but it's still a huge platform. So if you're thinking about any platform that you should grab, Facebook more often than not is going to be one of the places you're going to at least start. Instagram is second to Facebook with its daily login number. 63% of users log into the service at least once per day versus 74% of Facebook users who are active at least once per day on that site. Roughly a third of teens rate Instagram as their favorite social platform, which puts them behind the first place winner of Snapchat. So Instagram, I would say, if you have a lot of photos and video, or you're able to create a lot of photos and video in-house, could be a great social network for you, particularly if you're targeting younger people. At the very least, I always like to sit on a platform with my organization's name. I try to keep it consistent among Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and at least grab the platform so nobody else can take it from under you. And then once you can find the bandwidth, or maybe it is your bandwidth, maybe this is where your target demo is, spend some time creating content for that platform. Okay, so Twitter. It feels like almost all of us are on Twitter nowadays for a variety of reasons. But Twitter usage among US adults is actually much lower compared to other social media. In the US, 22% of adults use Twitter, and about 50 million people actively use the service each month. But as we discussed in the first class, size doesn't always equate with influence. And as we increasingly see global leaders make policy decisions via tweet, Twitter can still have a lot of authority despite its smaller size. Twitter's format, though, is ideal for timely content, meaning the platform continues to be popular for news and customer service. And as such, it's a great platform for your organization to keep a pulse on what's happening in the world, what conversations are going on, plus provide some real-time inputs like customer service, volunteer Q&A, or even donor engagement. I always say Twitter's probably the second channel I say if you have any presence on, probably should be Twitter. You don't have to spend a ton of time pushing content out there unless you really care about your follower count, but it's always good to have it because the content requirements for the platform aren't huge. And if you're going to be publishing content for Facebook and other places, you can probably come up with a handful of 280 character snippets from those pieces of content. YouTube, similar to Facebook, pretty much everybody uses YouTube. In the United States, it's actually more popular with 73% of US adults accessing it regularly. Videos become a substantial part of many organizations' content strategy. So establishing your presence is a good idea. Even if you don't have videos right now, create an organization account, like I said before, and just sit on it. In fact, that's what you should do for the rest of the social platforms, as I mentioned again, and try and grab that same username. You want to try to be as consistent as possible. We're going to talk a little bit more about YouTube because it kind of exists in a special category. It's not really a social network. It's a video hosting platform with social qualities. So why this platform is important to you is kind of multifold. One, it's ubiquitous. YouTube's so popular that it's often considered the second most popular search engine behind its sister company, Google. YouTube makes finding and sharing videos super simple. Once you've uploaded, YouTube will help you distribute your video to your subscribers and to people who are searching for similar content. Based on the users who watch your videos and the tags and descriptions that you provide, YouTube will serve up your video to other people on its platform. So it's doing some of the marketing for you. YouTube even uses their voice recognition technology to automatically process your videos and transcribe them to improve search. So try Google searching a how-to, and you might find a video as your top search results, as I have in this example. When I searched for how to tie a tie, this was the top result, and Google even suggests which time I should start the video to answer my question, as you can see here. And the third reason is it's embeddable and trackable. You can put a YouTube video just about anywhere, on your website, on other social media platforms, on other people's websites or blogs. They can be embedded, and you can set your video to be embeddable by other people. So I can go to your video on YouTube as a no-name person to you and say, wow, this is great. I want to embed it on my blog, grab the embed code, and I can go do that. And once I do, you can go into your YouTube dashboard in your YouTube analytics, and you can see all of the different views captured in one easy to view place, and all the types of places that are actually sourcing your video, like who else is watching it, who embedded it, and who's giving you those views. So when I watch this video, the person who posted it is going to see in their YouTube dashboard that it scored another view and where it came from. So in this case, Google search. So social media good to knows. When you're sharing content on social media, here are just a few things to keep in mind. Use visuals to supplement your copy. Always try to spice up the language with something for somebody to look at, whether you source it from a site like Pexels, which is free to use, copyright-free imagery and videos, or stuff you're generating yourself from fieldwork. Make sure you elevate the work of others, but don't forget to take some credit for yourself. You don't want it to always be the me show on social media. Obviously, social media is about other people and conversations and engagement around that sort of thing that you hear a lot about ad nauseum. And so you want to use that platform to point to your partners and share those success stories, but don't be afraid to take some victory lap yourself. Tag other people and organizations in your posts as often as you can. That's not only great for sharing credit, but it also expands your reach. Because if they see it, they'll share it. Other people who are following them will see it. So you want to try to share that credit around, even if you're taking some for yourself. Work with your partners to co-create your content. This is particularly useful if your organization is really lousy at doing one type of content and really great at another. So if you have phenomenal writers on your staff, but you cannot produce photos or videos, and you're working with a partner who can produce photos and videos, but is just abysmal at writing, that's a great partnership. One, you're getting that content need met that you can't fulfill yourself. But two, you're cross-pollinating your audiences, to use a marketing buzzword. You'll see this on the for-profit side if you follow any YouTube influencers or even some Instagram influencers. They'll sample from each other. So you might see somebody guest hosting a show on YouTube that has another channel, and they cross-post that video so that way they can share audience. So that's something you can look at as well on social media. Look professional, but be conversational. Obviously, we all represent professional organizations, but social media is supposed to be a conversational platform. So if all of your posts look like press releases, you're probably not going to get a lot of interaction. Try to make it try to make it conversational. You don't have to be rude, you don't have to use slang and things like that, but you can be a little bit more conversational. And finally, default to using relevant and familiar hashtags. A lot of people, when they post on social media, try to coin their own. And that can be great if you have a lot of clout around creating those sorts of things. You have a lot of partners that are doing it, or it's going to be paid and promoted. That could be great too. But generally, people use hashtags to search for things and contribute their own content against it. And so hashtags that are already established mean that you're getting people who are already talking about the thing that you're talking about, right? So don't reinvent the wheel. Just try to work with the people that are already there. And you might find that you also increase that end of the funnel of people that are aware and then interested in your organization. So now, the big platform. Your website is your organization's main hub. It's the place where you're most likely driving the majority of your traffic from social media. So when you're capturing email addresses, donations, where you're making big announcements, where you're sharing updates. And it's that way largely because you own your website. You decide what does or does not go there or how it should work. Posting to social media is great, and I think it's super important, and it increases your SEO, so driving people to your website. But ultimately, you're just leasing that space. Facebook owns Facebook, and keeping your users there will basically leave your audience somewhere in the realm of aware and interested, and not often enough in the engaged and committed categories of our engagement funnel. If Facebook shuts down tomorrow, what will happen to your audience if they never left Facebook? Just keep that in mind. You don't own Facebook, you're leasing it. So think about why you have a website, how users experience it, because those are important components. So for example, if you want someone to find your blog or your research, how many clicks does it take to get there? And you can see that in Google Analytics. You can see people's path through your site. If it's buried, they're not going to have an easy time finding it. And so if you're dedicating a lot of time to crafting stories or writing research reports or things of that nature, and then they're 6 clicks behind your navigation bar at the top, you're not going to get a lot of traffic to those pages. Think about how you capture that content and make it front and center. So let's take StoryCorps here. It's a nonprofit dedicated to capturing and sharing people's stories to build deeper connections through our lived experiences. So obviously they want you to be able to access the stories that they've collected, and they also want to enable you to contribute your own. So when you visit your homepage, which you can see right here, it's clear and easy to find those 2 navigation choices. They don't bury it. They want you to go to those places. So they're right up at the top. So look at your own website and think about where you want people to go and how they should get there. Again, look at Google Analytics if you're unclear about what the page path looks like. And you'll be able to tell where people land on your site, how many pages they go through to get to the final page, or how much time they have to spend on each page. If you want to spotlight your own storytelling, try to make sure it's as easy as possible for somebody to get to your stories. Next, email. which I often think is the forgotten yet never forgotten platform, because we all get dozens and dozens of emails per day. It's still a very active platform, as much as people try to convince you that just like Facebook, you should move off of it and away from it. It's a great way to share stories and news with your audience, particularly since email subscribers are likely in that interested, engaged, or even committed category from our funnel that we discussed earlier. These are the people who want to hear from you. They've invited you into their inbox. So you really have to make the most of it, because as I said, people get dozens and dozens and dozens of emails. So how do you stand out? Well, first, I think that there's a lot of experimentation that goes into emails. You might have to try a bunch of different things, and not everything will work with every audience member. So think about using an email newsletter. It's probably the most popular route. You could send a regular newsletter that rounds up a few blog posts, highlights upcoming events, or other shareable items, like social media posts, for example. Ideally, all of these things are your own, but they don't have to be. If you're a grant maker, share something from a grantee. If you're a nonprofit, spotlight a partner's work or a campaign, or spotlight one of your donors or volunteers. Find content that's both relevant to your work and useful and valuable to your reader. So this example above is a great newsletter called The Daily Dose of Nonprofit. It focuses on grabbing items from around the web that benefit nonprofit communicators and fundraisers. In each newsletter, there's a curated selection of articles, plus a shareable GIF and a funny quote. It has a very informal tone, it's very conversational and accessible, and all the content is gold. Ephraim does an awesome job curating this newsletter. So I put the link there if you want to subscribe or at least check out more. I highly recommend it. For another organization that I work with, we send a monthly wrap-up email in addition to their weekly newsletter, because they produce so much content. So based on the most popular posts from Google Analytics, we send that newsletter at the end of the month with links back to the most popular reads. And since starting this, we've seen a significant jump in readership on older articles, because not all of the posts on your site are going to be, or popular posts, excuse me, are going to be the most timely ones. But for example, with this organization, the most popular post on their site is actually about 3 years old, but the content itself is evergreen. It's timeless. So as long as it's popular, we continue to promote it. As long as we continue to promote it, it continues to get significant traffic. Another opportunity is to create a welcome series. Most email service providers have an automated feature to help you with this. It's either called a welcome series, or if you're using something like MailChimp, you'll see it as an automation. And these are great tools for introducing new subscribers to your work. All you need to do is create 2 or 3 very short emails welcoming someone to your list. Let them know what kind of content to expect as they onboard. Maybe share a link to a past newsletter, or maybe share a story from your blog or from your work that you want to highlight over a follow-up email or 2. This is just kind of the handshake into your organization. Usually get about 2 emails into a welcome series. You can try more, you can try less. Just check your statistics to see what your unsubs are. Another way is to create a weekly blog roundup. When you update your blog, it might feel painful to have to queue up a bunch of different promotions across social media, on your website, sending emails. So luckily, a lot of email service providers can help you do some things automatically. If your blog generates an RSS feed, services like MailChimp can create weekly emails with blog updates without your intervention at all. You can set up the template to include, your logo and a header, and then maybe an intro line like "this week from the blog." And then MailChimp does the rest. It imports that content from your RSS feed and then drops it in. If you want to handle this manually without doing it in an automated way, that's also fairly easy. It's a little bit more time consuming, but if email ends up being a great traffic generator for your site, a great way to engage your audience, then that's time well spent. So before we were saying that Facebook was a great traffic generator for your site, it's time well spent to produce content for Facebook. So if you're going to produce an email template manually, again, I would propose producing a template, a simple template to get you started, and then an easy way to just kind of drop in the content that you want to share, headline, photo, and then just like a brief description, and good to go. If you do this with some regularity and people know what to expect, you're usually going to be welcome into their inbox. Remember to give your audience something to do. Just because you're on email, don't forget to give them an action to take. It can be as simple as creating a social media share link for a graphic, a share this button essentially, that goes right with your email, or asking them to forward your note to a colleague. Try to find something that's simple, that's a non-donation ask when you're just getting started out, just an easy, low barrier entry. And then experiment with different formats and ideas. You should always be testing the way you present content, but it's even more important when you're just starting out. Open up your email service provider's analytics, look at the dashboard, look for the things like email open, click through, and unsubscribe rates. Those are the key numbers to tell whether your emails are reaching your audience. And your click through and unsubscribe numbers will let you know if they're being motivated to take any sort of action, reading the article, sharing the thing. But don't be discouraged when you receive an unsubscribe or two. That's really common. Again, we all get tons of emails. So sometimes people think they want to subscribe. They get a few e-blasts and like, you know what? I'm good by following you on Facebook or Twitter, or just by going to your website. Email lists have turnover like everything else. So just keep testing and trying new things. And as I mentioned at the start, some of the things aren't going to be right for everybody. I might want a newsletter, but a monthly newsletter, but somebody else might want your weekly blog updates. And using an email service provider, you can set that up too. So you can modify your preferences. So you shouldn't think of email as an all or nothing. Give your audience a choice. How often do you want to hear from us? Do you just want to get important news and alerts and announcements? Maybe that's once a quarter. Do you want to get weekly blog updates? Do you want to get a monthly newsletter? Give them those options on the sign up page. So you're always giving them what they want. They can always change them later. So let's move into evaluation. So your organizational goals tie directly to the digital metrics that you use to measure the efficacy of your storytelling efforts. So tracking progress over time with accurate, consistent, and quantifiable data builds a strong case to senior management for investing time and resources into future storytelling efforts, or if you need to restaff your team or invest in a better camera or something like that. So you want to pick metrics that are quantifiable. Pick metrics that are useful in informing your strategy and tactics so that you can adjust your approach as needed. Pick metrics that are meaningful to your team and to your organization. And don't pick vanity metrics. Figure out what you've actually trying to solve for and what you need to know to see if it's working. Don't just focus on your Twitter follower count or your Facebook fan page count if those metrics aren't actually useful to knowing if you're reaching the right people. So let's explore some basic things you can do to track and how they might be important to you. For the sake of timing, I'll primarily focus on the two most typical platforms, your website and Facebook, because some of these tips are actually translatable to other platforms as well. So let's start with the snake eating an elephant. This is an idea, obviously, from a storybook, and also from Garth Moore, who's the former US digital director at the One campaign and the father of the 40-60 rule post that I shared with you. So basically, if you skimp on marketing and outreach, the time you spend creating content for your site will only yield a slight bump in your traffic, and then it'll fade off in the background, as you can see up here. That's why it's important to consider how else each piece of content can be used and who should be reading and sharing it, because this is that evaluative model of the 40-60 rule in action. When you look at this top here and you can see that snake eating the elephant, you know that when you first created the content and you posted it, you had a spike, and then as you stopped promoting it, nobody cared anymore. So that's obviously a bad sign. So you want to think about that 40-60 rule. How do you promote that content more? How do you make that content better? How do you make that content more relevant? Try to not get that snake eating elephant, but essentially get a spike that goes up and then slowly comes down and then maybe levels out and plateaus, or maybe it spikes up again at some point. Just trying to keep activity on pages that, particularly pages that matter, right? Your cornerstone content, the pieces of work that you really want people to know about. It's because volume doesn't matter as much as quality, right? Pay attention to Google Analytics, Facebook Insights, Twitter Analytics, and other platforms. Which pieces or types of content perform best? So you can look at both. For those that are working well, is there a way to reshare that piece on your website or on other places? Or does anything you've produced warrant a follow-up? Those are also great content prompts. If you wrote a piece that's launching a new initiative, maybe it's time for a mid-year check-in. And then you can link back to that original piece and you can give people an update on where things are going. Maybe on your site, blog posts, or I'm sorry, research papers don't do so well, but blog posts do. And so repackaging those research papers in the blog posts or videos, can really drive some traffic. Think about what performs very well, and then try to think about other ways you can use your content. Who you're reaching. In each of your analytics platforms, you'll have access to demographic data, which we discussed earlier when you're trying to distill who your audience is. Now that you're creating and sharing content and you have an idea of who you want to reach and where to reach them, what are you seeing? When you look across Google Analytics, Facebook Insights, Twitter Analytics, and your own dashboards, do the ages and locations make sense to you? Were you aiming to reach millennials and falling squarely with baby boomers? If so, start asking why. Follow that line of questioning, follow that data to better understand why so many boomers were reading your stories, then were millennials, and try making those changes. Maybe you need to tap a new storyteller that's more relatable. Think back to our Steve Buscemi from last week's presentation, trying to talk to high school kids. Or maybe your content did really well on LinkedIn and just totally blew it on Facebook or Instagram. how can you adjust it to make it stronger if those are the platforms you need to perform on? Conversely, they could also be telling you that you're wrong. If you're performing super well on LinkedIn and in the target demographics that you had laid out for yourself, then maybe you should spend more time on LinkedIn, because that might be where your demographic is. Maybe you're trying to reach young professionals that are trying to do something, or career changers that are looking for content around something. So use that data to inform your next steps, to improve on what's working and retire what's not. And this graph in the back, I think, as I mentioned, is from Facebook, and there are similar ones across all platforms. If you visit the Posts tab in Facebook Insights, you'll see this graph. This graph shows you when your fans are online. This particular view is just kind of a generic curve based on your data. So you can see that between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. Pacific, this page has the most of its fans online. So in general, that's a great time to post. If you hover over one of the days of the week, you get an update to this graph, a blue line that surfs the top of each of the days in the visual by time of day, which gives you a more specific idea of when your audience is engaged with your content by the day of the week. And that's more helpful if you're planning your posting schedule for the week, which you can do directly on Facebook or by using a social media tool like Buffer or Crowdfire. So hover over the day, see which time the peak is highest, and plan to post around then. So 2 things to remember. Times are in Pacific time, so you'll have to adjust your posting to Eastern if you're on the East Coast, or Central or Mountain, depending on where you are. Just keep in mind that Facebook is showing these things in Pacific time. It's only giving you a 7-day view. So this data is only looking at the previous 7 days and can change over time. It's likely not drastic, but it does change. So I try to look at this about once a week. It's also important to remember that you shouldn't be a slave to Facebook's user data. Sometimes you might be getting the most traction on a single day or time because that's when you opted to run a Facebook ad campaign, or because there was a holiday which threw everybody's schedules out of whack. Or maybe people are just paying attention to you at 8 p.m. every Thursday because that's when you post consistently. So I run periodic experiments to make sure you're optimizing your timing, or you're not getting a large spike in traffic at one point in the day and then nothing the rest. So just play around with your posting. You also want to make sure that you're reaching the right people, which of course will impact when you post. So you'll also see similar data in Google Analytics that shows you when people are most engaged with your content, which can be useful in deciding when to post on Twitter or even when to send out an email newsletter. You should experiment with different times, as noted with Facebook above, to see if maybe moving your newsletter sends to a slower day helps even out your site traffic, or if it just shifts it completely. On the other hand, it may spotlight that your website is really popular in the Pacific time zone, but your content is really targeting East Coast cities. So you might want to make a few tweaks to alleviate for that. Or you may not care at all when people come, just as long as they come. In that case, this information may just be helpful for guiding when you post. On Facebook, you can share 3 types of posts: videos, photos, and links. Generally, videos perform best, then photos, then links. When you visit the post section in Facebook Insights, it'll show you a chronological view of each day, of each of your posts, what type of post it was, its reach, and its engagement, which Facebook defines as reactions, comments, and shares. The most clicks and reactions the post receives, the more likely it is to receive more, because that's how Facebook pushes content. That's how it signals to Facebook that it should provide some sort of boost to this on your behalf. Well, you can't see the specific posts in this table. I took those out for privacy purposes. You can glean the other data points. And if you go to your organization's Facebook Insights, you'll see the posts line up against the rest of this table. I tend to review this table about once a week as well, as I draw up content for the coming week's calendar. When I look at this table, what I'm really looking for are the reach and the engagement, because those indicators are most helpful in telling me what type of post from the previous week was the most popular, and if I should think about either reusing that content, making another post from that, or posting it on another platform. If you're thinking about how often to post, it's generally at least once per day and no more than 3 times per day. Again, generally speaking, you should experiment with your own pacing, but I'd also be mindful of how much content that you have to share. You don't want to, blow everything all at once because you had a good week on blogs and have nothing to share later on another week. Or just as Facebook can help lift up engaging content, it also suppresses oversharing, redundancy, and what it perceives to be spam. So just keep an eye on when you're posting and how your posts do over time, and you'll get a sense of when you should post and how much you should post. It's also good to remember that Facebook is mostly an ad platform, so you're not going to have a bonkers post every day. If you do, great, but they're really trying to pine for your ad dollars, so keep that in mind as you post as well. You don't have to spend, but they want you to. So you might see some suppressed traffic. On your website in Google Analytics, you'll be able to see top posts by going to behavior and then the content drill down page, which will show you a list of the top pages on your site. I pulled this example from one page that I manage, so I didn't include the page headers or the page titles, but you can see the types of data that come back. The page views, or the number of times the page has been viewed, the unique page views, essentially the number of people that have viewed it, the average time on page, how long they spent there, and the bounce rate, the percentage of people that viewed that page, and then they just left the site completely. There are definitely other indicators that matter when you're assessing your website traffic, and those numbers will be found in other views on Google Analytics. But from this view, the important things to pay attention to, if you're asking which of my stories did people read the most, will be your unique page views, as well as the total page views if you really want to count on the number. I always look at the uniques. How many people read this? Then you probably want to look at the average time on page as an indicator about whether they spent enough time on the page to consume your content. So if you notice that the average time is 2 seconds, and you had a 1-minute read, it's probably not enough time that they spent on page, and it was probably not a great source that was directing that traffic to your page. And then finally, the bounce rate, which tells us if they read your article, if after they read your article, they left the website immediately, or if they went on to another story or another page. So a high bounce rate means that they read it and they left. A lower bounce rate means that the number of people read it and then they moved on to something else and something else. If you want to keep people on your site, you want to lower your bounce rate as best you can. Again, you'll certainly want to look at other indicators based on the goals that you set, like where site traffic is coming from, so where they're being referred to, which age groups are most engaged, et cetera. And you can apply additional filters to surface that information on this Google Analytics view or others. So some tools you can use. I referenced Canva before, and I have a link there this time for you to check out. Canva is a quick and easy graphic design photo editing tool. It's particularly nice because it's easy to use, fairly robust free tier. You can do this for social media or print media, things like that. Check out the link, because again, if you're a registered 501c3, they offer their premium tier to you for free, I think for up to 10 seats. So check out that link for details. IFT and Zapier are useful in connecting different apps to one another. So like Google Forms and MailChimp, or Twitter and Google Sheets. So for example, if you're running a campaign that uses a particular hashtag, you can set up an IFT recipe or a Zap that will collect those tweets in a Google Sheet for you, so you don't have to search them manually. Or two recipes that I find particularly helpful in my work are connecting Pocket, a read it later service, to Google Sheets. So whenever I save a Pocket article with a particular tag, IFT pulls that article into a spreadsheet, separates the title, the date, and the URL out for me to make it easier for when I want to share on social media. I also run a second one that pulls in blog posts that get published to a blog into a spreadsheet to create a type of content calendar in retrospect. Linktree is a lifesaver for platforms like Instagram. If you've ever seen an Instagram post, the person says link in bio, this tool will help you fix that. You create a Linktree account, then you curate the links that you want to show there, like your own personal Twitter feed, kind of curating each one of the blocks that you want to be there, the articles and photos and whatnot. And when somebody clicks on your Linktree link, they see that list instead of just going to one page. They'll see a list of things that you might want to share. So this is really useful for Instagram, but it could also be used for the end of presentations or for physical collateral, since you can circulate a mailer without worrying that the page you put on there will be out of date. Crowdfire is my social media tool of choice. It can help you curate content by topics that you select. It can also help you surface content from people that you follow, and then it'll schedule them once you kind of approve them and set them up. Highly recommend checking it out. It's super easy to use. There's a free tier and a paid tier, just like everything else. Check out the link in the slide. And then Squish, which we talked a little bit about last week. When your photos are just too big, you can squish them. This app is free. You upload them and it resizes them. It's beautiful. It does it very quickly, and it works 99.9% of the time, so check it out. I'm sorry to rush through that last section, but I also want to make sure that we had plenty of time for questions.
Thank you, Jeremy. So if the audience has any questions, feel free to chat it into the chat pane on your Zoom interface, or feel free to use the Q&A section as well. I know we don't have too much time today for questions, but the great thing is that we still have the one-on-one storytelling coaching session available. So after our session and class today, you will receive a link that will allow you to book a time with Jeremy to have more detailed discussions and questions on your storytelling questions. But in the meantime, we have about 5 minutes. Feel free to chat in any questions you have right now, and we'll be happy to get those answered. Great, sounds good. So we have a few questions coming in. So Heather is asking, Jeremy, how would you use podcasts as part of your storytelling strategy?
I mean, podcasts are a great media. They do require obviously some upfront dedication and time to create a consistent program, then to be able to stick to it on a fairly consistent schedule, to make sure that you have the right hardware involved. Like having a mic and a place that you can sit to record audio is super important. Um, and then having some sort of consistent content. And so if you go through the podcast store on for Apple or for Stitcher or wherever, you'll see kind of the litany of things that are available. And so you need to decide, like for my organization, if I use a podcast, what would that format be? Would we invite people in as a Q&A? Would we read something? Would it be a discussion among staff? You're going to want to have something a little bit more consistent, because essentially a podcast is a radio show. And so if you think about it from that perspective, that can help you guide, at least in the setup and the content. It's also It also gives you a lot of opportunities, though, for other types of media engagement. So you could record your podcast with a webcam in the back, so that way you can also live stream it on YouTube, right? And that gives you some place that you could live stream it to on your page, or do a Facebook Live using it. Pull questions in from Twitter. There are 1,000 different ways that you can think about how you would collect questions or engage with people during, before, after a podcast. So I would keep that in mind as well. But the key thing that hits me when anybody asks about podcasts is like, what would your show be about? And once you figure that out, can you do that, once a week, once every 2 weeks, something like that, so people can expect to receive that in their feed?
Yeah, and you also have to be really regular too. So when people are discovering different podcasts on iTunes or Spotify, the ones that don't or not actively updated, then it's harder for audiences to find. Another question we have come in from Amanda is, any suggestions on how nonprofits should be using social media and storytelling during this coronavirus outbreak? She has concerns that it might look odd to continue telling their existing story without addressing the more widespread narrative right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It might not just look odd. It might just kind of seem tone deaf, right? If something's going on in the world, whether it's this crisis or anything else, if you're sharing a bunch of content that's just not related or seems really off topic to the conversation, it can seem a little strange, like you're really not paying attention. So I have a couple of thoughts. So one is, if you have any content that is actually useful during a time like this, now's the time to share it. I work with an organization that some of their content is actually healthcare focused or mental health and anxiety focused, which is super useful at a time like this, to be talking about your mental health care, or thinking about how you access, how you'd work out in your apartment if you don't have regular access to a gym, things like that that are useful and valuable to people. Another way to think about it is, do you work with any organizations that are actively working to help people around this outbreak? How can you amplify their work? Or how can you amplify the messaging coming from official channels? I can tell you that right now, some of the big tech companies are actually kind of manipulating their own algorithms. So they're surfacing more content around the outbreak from official channels. So Google search results, they're playing down people who are buying keywords related to COVID-19, because they don't want people to find those keywords from a random organization. They want them to find them from the government.
Amazing. So in terms of your advice for it sounds like kind of not being tone deaf is super important, like maybe tweaking and shifting your story in a way that complements and supports the existing narrative is really important. But what about fundraising? Like when it comes to a lot of these organizations that we talk to at CauseVox, they're either canceling their event or they're postponing it. Do you have any tips or best practices in kind of communicating to your donors during this time for existing fundraising events or the ones that are being planned?
Yeah, I mean, I might actually kick this back to you in a second too, because I think you have a pitch on this for a upcoming conference call. But because so many people are canceling conferences and events, so for example, this organization that both Rob and I were on the board for called N10 has their annual conference in March, and they just canceled it. That conference is 62% of their budget. So they took a major financial hit. They were very honest with the community about it. Obviously, public health trumps finances for this. So um, we are actually fundraising for them on their behalf. And so this is an opportunity for an organization like N10, who's a community-driven organization, to activate their community to say, hey, we could use a hand. We need help fundraising because we took a big hit. They're still doing a service for organizations where they're helping to make sure that they can continue to do it. And for organizations that might not do direct service or want to provide some sort of information to their funders, that might be an email or instructions on their business continuity, letting them know like business is operating as usual. We might go a little bit quieter on our communications to clear some airspace for official comms from the people that matter during a pandemic, but things are still happening. Here's what our plan is. Here are the key players that are involved, just providing a little bit of reassurance. And Rob, I think you have a conference call coming up. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a free webinar coming up on Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern. We basically put this together to help nonprofits navigate the coronavirus and the effects of it. So we're inviting 2 or 3 nonprofit organizations that we work with, one of them being the Queensway Hospital in Canada, to just basically give nonprofits some tips on how to make this transition programmatically when it comes to a nonprofit's social mission, when it comes to working together as a team, and also when it comes to fundraising. So very important. It's a free webinar. You can go to causevox.com. I'll paste in the link over here if you folks don't have it, and we'll also include it in a summary email if you want to sign up for free. I do when it comes to storytelling right now, though, one best practice is just to over communicate. Talk to your donors about how things have changed, and they would understand because it's in the news, and how your organization is making shifts to meet some of the upcoming changes as because of the results of the coronavirus and possibly because of the incoming economic dip or recession. So I think it's great to over communicate, tell a narrative, but also tell your donors and supporters that you all are working hard to still make a difference in any way that you can. Well, that being said, I think that's all the time we have for questions. In terms of next steps, you all will be receiving an email summary. So it includes class number 1, class number 2, slides and videos by tomorrow morning. In that email too, you will receive a link to schedule a one-on-one time with Jeremy Bivens, your storytelling coach, to answer any questions you have, as well as to navigate whether it be coronavirus issues or other digital storytelling issues or fundraising storytelling issues. He's there to help. And lastly, in that email too, you will receive a link to the digital storytelling blog framework, which is listed here, the bit.ly/GDS blog template. You will receive that, so feel free to check it out. I looked at it already, it looks amazing. Gives you a very detailed framework and structure on how to create the best performing blog posts and stories on your website. So check it out there. Well, without keeping you all too long, I know we are over time. Jeremy, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate your knowledge and insight into digital storytelling.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting this, Rob, and to CauseVox for really facilitating all of this, and to everybody for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much. Look out for an email from CauseVox very soon.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.